Commissioner Kilroy,
Present.
Commissioner Carlson,
Present.
and Vice Chair Krazan.
Present.
And for the record, Commissioners Bauer, Walters, and Callahan are out, but we do have a quorum and we can conduct business.
All right. Roger, could I ask you to do the roll call?
Salute.
Salute.
The salute? Yes. Thanks for reading my
Sure.
mind.
Please rise. If you're able, cover your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. I have a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
So moved.
second.
Motion carries.
Any opposed?
Oh, any opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Do we have any blue folder items?
We do not tonight.
Okay. Item F, consent calendar. I think we had some people absent next time, so these have to be separate, right? Could I have a motion to approve the affidavit of posting for the Harbor Commission meeting of June 12th, 2023?
So moved.
Second, but are we doing both items on the consent calendar, the minutes and the
You were here, right?
affidavit of post?
You can certainly pull them and do them separately if you'd like.
I don't think Roger was here last time, right?
Yeah, he made it.
Was he?
Yeah, Roger, I think,
No,
Unless-
I was out last meeting and I'm shown as present.
uh,
So good
I
catch.
thought you came in a few minutes late.
I thought that was the one you just came
I
in
thought
late.
you weren't going to make it, and then you,
This was the May meeting, and that was the one where I was driving around with an inflatable boat behind my truck.
Okay.
I can show you pictures.
Totally up to you.
So whatever you guys did wasn't my fault.
So you're recusing yourself, so that's a question. Can we approve the minutes? We have a quorum for the meeting, but if
Well,
only,
let's do F1 first.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
You seconded F1?
sure.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And then for the approval of the following minutes, so there's a correction to that Roger was not here.
So that brings us down to 3 where we don't have a quorum. We could just push it to
Yeah.
the next meeting.
Technically,
Yeah,
it's Roger's choice. Technically, he can't approve the minutes even though he was absent.
okay.
He does not
Oh.
have to abstain. It's his choice.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
But we started the meeting with a quorum. Do you need a quorum to take the vote? If you have,
You would need a quorum to take the vote, for sure, but it's up to him as to whether or not he makes quorum. He doesn't have, you can be absent and still approve minutes.
So it's up to Roger and how you want to proceed if you,
I'm comfortable not abstaining and approving the minutes. This
Okay.
is pretty minor and there's a video record and so.
motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Can I second? Any opposed?
negative.
Okay, motion carries.
Wait, good catch.
Do we have anything for excluded consent calendar items?
we do not.
Okay. I'd like to invite public participation on non-agenda items. Do we have any e-comments that we want to pull or Zoom, if we're still doing that?
We do not have any comments on Zoom or any e-comments.
All right,
I'm sorry, in the copy of the minutes I have, I'm listed as absent, not as present.
oh, okay, so they're correct.
Yeah, so I think we're fine.
Just point of clarification there.
Yes, got it. All right, we have no public hearings and no continued items from previous agendas, so we're up to item L1, discussion and consideration of the fiscal year 2023-24 proposed budget and 5-year capital improvement program.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike, our city manager, Mike Rosansky is here to talk about the proposed budget. If you remember last month, he appeared and we were really just, the budget wasn't formulated at that point, but he was here to kind of take your comments on what you thought should be included in the budget. Now we do have one. City Council has looked at this twice at this point. It was introduced to them on May 30th, and then they talked about it at their June 6th meeting. They do plan to talk about the budget and the CIP tomorrow night, where it'll mainly be the CIP being discussed, but anything can be discussed at that night. And then ultimately, this thing's going to go forward on 6/20 and hopefully be adopted. But Mike's going to walk you through it a little bit. I think, in terms of the waterfront, in my staff report, I highlighted 2 decision packages that relate to the waterfront. The first one was number 10, where we're actually getting a new staff member in the waterfront division to kind of help out. It's a full-time staff member as well, so that it's going to be immense with how much is going down at the waterfront right now, project-wise. And the second one is getting some help, some professional contract service help to prepare a leasing strategy for the waterfront. Mainly priority sites, opportunity sites such as Fun Factory, Pier Plaza, things like that. But I'll let Mike walk you through the budget itself, and then we can open it up to public comment and then questions and discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Good to see you all again. We'll give you a bit of a primer on the overall general fund budget, and then I think your focus will largely be in the waterfront, so I'll try to tailor some of the remarks to that area of interest. On the bigger picture side, the general fund budget as proposed is balanced. We start with about $2.4 million of unallocated fund balance, and after the various decision packages, which are, as you know, and we've talked about, proposed budget modifications to the core budget that goes into the preparation of the document, and the various revenues that are part of that. The final unallocated balance if the decision packages were approved as proposed would be about $1.7 million. So the council has a little bit of discretionary money as part of their budget making consideration. And the good news is in this budget, it is as proposed. We actually achieve structural balance, meaning ongoing revenues are equal to or greater than ongoing revenues. That's a positive and something that we have not been able to articulate and say for some time, given the challenges that we faced over the last few years. So that's one of the highlights of the general fund budget. It's not to say that if the council takes different actions, that could be somewhat stressed on a structural basis. But as proposed, we are balanced both one time and ongoing, which is great. The one thing that I would like to point out as it pertains to the waterfront is I did very much take to heart your commentary and our sit down and get together. 2 of the items that Greg mentioned, I think have been items that this commission has asked for support for the waterfront staff to help with general administrative function, understanding of leases, accounting, and some of those bigger issues. The other being that we need to formulate and build our team as it pertains to leasing strategies for renewal of the key opportunistic sites down the waterfront. The one area that I very much heard you on, but think is a little bit premature as it relates to this city council strategic plan was the notion of a harbor master conversation. You might know that the strategic plan includes a specific objective to study the various formats that are out there, and we'll be bringing that back in early 2024. So hesitated to present anything in the proposed budget that spoke directly to your conversation request for the harbor master position. Not to say it wasn't a great idea, but one that, given the council's interest in that strategic planning objective, I felt we'll probably be revisiting either next mid-year or as part of next year's budget. So it was taken to heart, but ultimately I think next year will be the better time for us to think about that significantly. What you'll see in the capital plan is that there's not a lot of changes in the harbor uplands and tidelands related proposals. We talk about moving a little bit of money out of the harbor dredging project. We have $4.5 million budgeted there. We talk about moving a little over $400,000 out of that account. The reason being, and we just advertised the project for bid last Tuesday night. The council approved the plans and specifications. It will be posted and advertised to the contracting community next week. We are in motion on that project. Our latest engineer's estimate actually has the contractor price at somewhere closer to $2.5 million. So we might actually see some savings there. May not have to spend the full $4 million that's remaining in the CIP, but certainly not the $4.5 that we had going into the fiscal year. And I'll speak a little bit about those hopeful savings in a second. We do talk about moving a little bit of money, additional money into the International Boardwalk paving project. A couple of $100,000 is proposed to supplement that work to make sure we can get that work done. Good news there, we did do a borings analysis, had a structural engineer take a look at the soils composition in the boardwalk. The results came back positive. The soil is well drained and well compacted and will make a pretty solid subsurface for whatever paving treatment that we do ultimately decide on. So we wanted to make sure that project was sufficiently funded to completion, and we feel good about what's proposed in the budget. We have completed the sport fishing pier removal. We have completed the pier, or just about completed the pier railings project. We have completed the pier lighting installation project. We are well underway in the replacement of the docks and the pump out facility in Basin 1 around the Harbor Patrol Station. That project should be done in the next several weeks. And we are out to bid on dredging. So a lot of the big projects are completed or underway. The remaining projects in the harbor really deal with the parking structure effort, which the primary focus there is going to be the shear walls associated with the Fun Factory space, making sure we get out in front of that as quickly as we can. We have safety and operational enhancements as a project that's in the carryover list of assignments in the waterfront that still needs work and attention. But ultimately, what we did with the budget this year as it pertains to the waterfront is recognize, A, we're starting to finally work through the backlog of capital projects that are there. And B, there's still enough on that list to hesitate from investing more money into the waterfront right now, making sure that we can complete these existing projects before leaning into new. And C, recognizing that the tidelands and uplands on a pro forma basis are still under some duress. They're improving this year. When I say improving, meaning annualized revenues versus ongoing expenditures, that gap, that subsidy, that delta that was there last fiscal year is tightening up. We're about $400,000 underwater in the tidelands. We're about $800,000 underwater in the uplands. So that gap is closing, but it's not quite yet there structurally. Now, I think year-end actuals will probably bear out that we'll see greater savings than likely budgeted, and we'll still see funds accrue to both those areas. But on a structural budget basis, we're still operating net expenditure higher than net revenue. So we're cautious about investing too much in additional capital. We're really focused on spending and executing what we have in place. And from what I'm told and what I've observed, that's happening at a much greater clip than it used to with bringing on Chris King, who's our dedicated maintenance manager to the waterfront projects, both landside and waterside. And that's what's great about Chris. Separate from the harbor master conversation is Chris is finally somebody on the maintenance side of the equation who has true expertise in marina maintenance and waterside, landside maintenance. I mean, he drove piles in his prior career. He understands the impact that sea air has on structures. He really has a great foundational knowledge for ongoing maintenance. And he's got his own list of things to do. He's working through them. He's been improving restrooms. He's been really doing a great job for us. And I know he's been working very closely with Greg and all of that effort. And what I've also heard from our engineering team is that he's been lightening the load on our engineering staff who used to get drawn in to some of these more basic maintenance discussions due to lack of expertise. So Chris has been a big bonus to overall functionality, and he was an investment. His position was an investment that we made about a year and a half ago. So just something to keep in mind. The decision packages, again, as they pertain to the waterfront, very straightforward. Did not want to get too expensive as we think through future, but we recognize that we really do have big upside and big revenue opportunity on the horizon once we get some of these new leases executed, once we position some of these new sites, and we really make an investment into the waterfront's future on a site-by-site basis. As I've said internally, we got an opportunity to hit a lot of singles and doubles down there, and I think really generate some vibrancy to the waterfront. So we're excited about that. And that's not to mention, we've got a $3 million contract issued for Seaside Lagoon renovation. Thankfully, we're spending the state's money doing that. $500,000 of that $3 million is dedicated to the waterfront promenade designs. That's something we're also incorporating there. Greg's got work to execute the pay station installation project down in Moldee so we can get rid of the operational expenses we have in staffing the gate, that kind of a thing. That's underway. We've got an expert that's helping us prepare the revised handicap parking space and site layout for the various pay station meters. So we're moving there. Those are going to be great projects that aren't all that expensive, but will have, I think, a very noticeable impact.
We've got money to, not to interrupt, sorry, but we've got money to start the studies and the entitlement process for the new public boat launch,
Right?
which is a big, those studies are going to dictate just how the boat launch is situated, how the queuing area works, how the demand is, and really how the parking layout goes to satisfy all the needs out there. It's really going to be kind of the first domino to fall to see how the rest of the waterfront is going to kind of pan out.
So I see it as a lot of exciting things are in the queue and happening and are starting to be worked through in the waterfront. So rather than kind of pile onto that back end of that list, let's get through and focus on the priority items in front of us. And there's really good stuff there. Just executed the skate park. That project is done and complete. We're not having the ribbon cutting just yet because we're waiting for the mural component to be completed so we can all celebrate that as well. But a lot of really, really great stuff happening in the waterfront right now. And we're on the precipice of some really exciting stuff. So that's kind of the mindset as you look at it in the budget. And that's kind of where I approached it from. And as Greg and I talked, we really focused on what do we need to execute, the task at hand. And there's some exciting things there. We had a really interesting walkthrough and inspection with the Army Corps of Engineers last Friday. We had a pre-meeting with them a couple weeks before that to talk about the status of the breakwater. I know that's been a concern of the commission. Many members of our boating community have been worried about it. We implored and impressed upon them the concerns that we felt locally about last year's storm action and the sort of wave overtopping and kind of what's the status of the breakwater? Is it in good shape? Can you make immediate repairs? We've come to learn very clearly that in their view, the Army Corps' view, sort of two fundamental things. One, our breakwater at 22 feet is the largest and the widest in their system on the West Coast, which I found quite interesting. Two, and the gentleman that was there, Chuck, was part of the original redesign back in 1992. He started with the Corps, and the first thing he said he got on his lap was, in the 1980s, Redondo had all these major storms. You got to fix this problem. So that's why we have a 22-foot breakwall, because we were sort of coming in on the heels of that major disaster in the 80s. But he said one thing that I think was kind of news to a lot of us. There's been talk about needing to extend the south seawall. Well, he said the south seawall was extended to its desired length. It was a bit of a misnomer. There was a partial completion at one point, and then they extended it from there. What he made comment of is it's not, the height is one thing. There was additional width added to help manage wave action and surge. So there's two components to how he ultimately views our breakwater. There's width that has some ability to diffuse waves and surging, and then there's height that really manages wave action and overtopping. He says both are critical in ultimately protecting our harbor. So this individual was key on this list. He was a critical component of the inspection, and we will be receiving from them in the next month or two the updated inspection report. The good news is they have understood our concerns. They have been managing and monitoring the breakwater each year for the last several years. They started pre-design work at our behest because they knew that we were concerned. But what they did say that was a little bit disappointing is they cannot, by procedure, take a project out to bid until there is money in the president's budget, which will not occur until October 1st of this year. So they said, even if you came to us, even if we recognize that there was an absolute imminent breach here, we cannot react on an emergency basis unless there is a breach. That's basically step one for them, to respond and do immediate repairs outside the scope of their normal environmental process, bidding process. And he said, that's not the case here. And he said, two, your project is, we have a biologist, we have pre-design work going, we have engineering specs that are being prepared, and we have an anticipated $10 million that's going to hit your budget in October, or hit the president's budget in October. We will bid the project, and we have every hope that we will be constructing the repair in summer of 2024, summer and fall of 2024. So good news is we have their full attention. They fully appreciate and understand the condition of the breakwater. They certainly will, more so after last Friday's inspection. They are on notice of our concerns. They are moving as quickly as they can. Certainly the inspection report will drive, what their next steps and actions are. But it seems that from their point of view, the breakwater is performing as it should, it's degrading as it should, and they will be repairing it, in their view, with $10 million, which they think is a sizable amount of money to do the work that they see needing to be done out there about a year from now. That's kind of the latest.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No problem.
for a second there, I thought you were going to say, they say it's fine.
No, they're
Thanks.
still proceeding, yeah.
So what do you think the repair looks like? Just filling in the holes, or probably
Well,
not making it
we
any
talked
taller?
about that
or-
because, we're
Yeah.
going out to bid on dredging and we're like, well, what do you want us to do with the rock? Do you want us to throw it up there? They said, no, that's the worst thing you could do. So these breakwaters have to be repaired almost like a Jenga puzzle. You've got to put each piece together. They have to interlock. They have to work as a fabric. Said the worst thing you could do is put spoils on top of it. They'll just become projectiles. You have to do it right. They said, so you can't really contribute. You can't, they're happy we're doing the dredging, mind you. In fact, it might have helped us a little bit to strengthen the wall this last year, based on what we heard from them. They said, certainly having it there didn't hurt you. It might have helped you, but knowing that you're pulling that material out next winter, based on your timeline, helps us access later in the summer for the project. So we're working well together. We kind of stumbled into this candidly with the timing of everything, but that seems to be locked up pretty well. So they say they've got to put together their whole geometric plan. They have to go out and fabricate the rocks or find the rocks that are needed based on size and scope. And then they'll procure them, and then they'll prepare to have them basically laid. So it's a process. They'll look at the most efficient areas. They're very, very familiar with the areas that have weakness in our breakwater, but they don't describe it that way. They describe it as it's degrading where you would expect it to grade over time. So they're kind of, pardon the pun, their freak out meter isn't the same as our freak out meter, basically.
I was going to ask, you said unless there's a breach. So breach isn't, we've got waves coming under the wall. It's
Right.
a gross.
Yeah, breach is like,
Yeah.
I can see through the breakwater now.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of, I thought, a very interesting takeaway. But the good news is we're fully engaged. They have a assigned project manager, they have biologists, they have engineers, they have got their former experts. It was encouraging that they're taking us seriously. And obviously that $10 million appropriation in the White House budget this year has got their full attention. So the reason I mentioned the dredging and the hope that there might be some savings on our project is because the other thing we may want to do, given that their work is imminent, is to piggyback on their efforts and actually spend some money to have them repair the portion of the wall that runs from basically the yacht club east that is technically part of Mole A and is city responsibility, not Army Corps responsibility. So there may be an area and an opportunity for us to work and partner with them in a cost-effective way, spend some of our resources to partner and see that work done efficiently at the same time. So we're talking to them, we'll be engaging them in that conversation, and they very much encourage that. They were actually quite pleased to hear that dredging was about to begin. They were anticipating having to do some of that work as a preamble to getting their work done. So definitely something that's looming, something to be thinking about, but they're, that's kind of a sidebar to say, though, there's a lot of really good things happening on the capital side and the waterfront. We're committed to them. And we're excited about getting them executed, and we were pleased with what we got done this last year, or at least designed and started. Yes, sir.
So going off what you said, it seems like working with them to repair, add to whatever the area of the break wall closest east, as you said, of King Harbor Yacht Club and that area there. Should there be an appropriation to the capital improvement, some kind of dollar amount?
I think we're okay for
Holding?
now. I think we use the dredging element if we need to, or we ultimately use our pier structure, regular set aside for pier structure repairs if we have to. I don't see us struggling to appropriate in Tideland's monies if the need arises based on their
So
opportunity.
when that subject comes up a year from now, I guess
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. So if we need to jumpstart it at mid-year, we would jumpstart it at mid-year. If we need to jumpstart it when we close out the dredging project and make clear that we're going to save whatever residual monies are there for that work effort, we may do it then. We don't have to add it to the CIP. It's definitely something, though, that's on
Yeah, I mean, I understand you don't really even know what the dollar amount would be.
just don't know.
It's kind of a.
Yeah, it'd be a grab bag. So knowing that we, at least based on the most recent engineering estimate, we're a little bit, hopefully, I don't want to use the word overfunded yet, but we might have a little bit extra in the dredging project. That's something I could see us very easily reappropriating for that type of a repair. As funds are somewhat limited right now in both locations. So if you take out all the GASB, cost and accounting requirements, the Tidelands Fund's got about $2.5 million of cash in it that's unallocated, and the Uplands has got a little bit over $1 million. So we're as tight in those two areas as we've been in a very long time. And that's in part because of the distress we're coming out of in COVID with leasing revenues being challenged, but also because candidly, we've finally been spending money on capital that was sitting there in the funds for quite some time. So the good news is when we spend it, we see the results of that expenditure. Bad news is our fund balance gets a little tighter. So both funds are feeling that right now.
So a couple things. One, it's my understanding that the south end of the outer break wall, they ran out of money, so they did not increase the height or the width there. And that's where you see the step down.
Yeah, that's not the south wall. You're talking about the south end of the north wall. Yeah, that one they talked about, well, and this is what was interesting. Chuck mentioned this to Andy, saying in part some of that was purposeful because it's a little bit wider at that tip, not as high. So I'd like to really have him answer that question because he had a lot more detail as to what occurred in the early 90s than a lot of the expectation that we had around here based on kind of our understanding of the history.
Yeah, and my second, when I look, and I'll redo it again, but when I looked at the historical photos of the south break wall, it does not appear to be extended, and certainly not the 300 feet that was in their studies in 82.
Yeah,
So I question whether the veracity of that statement.
He was very adamant about it, per Andy. I wasn't there for that part of the conversation. Chuck wasn't on our call that preceded the inspection the 2 weeks prior. So that was Andy's takeaway. He was a little surprised. So we're planning to do some follow-up and understand exactly what.
It should be easy to pull up old aerial photos and verify. If anything, it's not 300, well, there were two versions, 150 and 300 feet. I don't even think it makes the 150, but.
It's just good that we've got this Chuck engaged with us now.
Yeah.
So we
And
have
regardless, even if they did it, you can still see the surge coming into the harbor.
yeah,
So
no question.
It didn't work.
No question, no question. So they did a lot of studies. There's a lot of rationale for exactly how it's oriented, how it's positioned, what its height is. But I found it interesting that at 22 feet, we were the highest in their western system. So.
Well, I also think we're one of the most exposed from a size
Well,
of
that's
how
because of
close the boats are to the.
That and the channel. I guess the channel creates a lot of energy that potentially, the canyon, I should
Canyon,
say.
yeah.
That
Redondo
creates a
Canyon.
lot of problems potentially for.
Especially near the yacht club.
Right. So it's interesting that how much info this gentleman had. But we've got a full team assigned. We've got names. We've got contacts. We've got follow-ups. I finally feel good about their engagement because, for the last couple of years, we've been scratching our heads, kind of yelling into the wind, hoping somebody's paying attention. And now they're fully engaged.
And then you said the dredging RFP went out. We didn't get to see that. Does it dump outside the harbor?
You didn't need to see it because it includes all your recommendations.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We trust,
We
we
went
verify.
ahead and cut that a month just to make sure that it was all done. So no, the spec calls for the deposits to be at off the avenues location. So, and we didn't even bother with an alternate reduction that would have allowed for it to be placed on the interior of the harbor. So we just said, hey, let's just be done with this. Let's get them focused and deposit it and move forward. So.
Okay.
Yep. So we'll have bids back hopefully latter part of July. We'll know kind of what that price tag is. Work won't begin the permit doesn't allow us to begin work until January. Can't work in the late fall, early winter. We can only perform, as I understand, between January and the end of July for dredging. So, yeah.
You done, or can I ask a couple?
I'm done.
I meant to say at the start, thanks for coming down. Thanks for spending time with us. Thanks for listening to us. And thanks for doing that over the years. I mean, I've been really happy with budget for harbor stuff in the last couple of years. And again, this year, I'm glad to see another head in there. We've been reaching the point where we have more projects than we can accomplish. And as a guy that lives in North Redondo, come on, please keep paying attention to Artesia. So one sort of overall question, do you have any inkling on what the future looks like? I mean, COVID's been so weird. The budgets have been so weird.
I'm optimistic.
Does it keep staying good?
I'm optimistic. I'm a little stressed about where we sit today. I'm a little stressed about, I'd love a little more money in the bank, on the fund balance basis, certainly to, not have to worry about, $400,000 or $800,000 annualized, deficits. But once we get some of these new leases executed and once the motor starts running, I think the future's bright. I really do. So I'm optimistic. I'm a little, cautiously optimistic the next 2 years. I want to see us get this work done. I think we all know we're going to need a lot more money to get Seaside Lagoon, even reconstructed in its sort of current configuration, just closing the loop, stopping the discharge, basically rebooting the lagoon as we know it today with a fresh look and new infrastructure. We can't get done for $7-8 million. We're going to need a lot more money than that. So I worry a little bit about that getting paid for because, one of the budget response reports that you want to look at is, there's not going to be a time schedule order issued for the Seaside Lagoon this year. The good news is they're not going to issue a new updated 5-year NPDES permit. So we're not going to face.
Can you say that again? There's not going to be a what?
Yeah. So the Seaside Lagoon, we under the city's MS4 stormwater water quality discharge permit in the ocean, right? That is managed by the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board under state requirements, right? Port of Cologne Act, Clean Water Act, all of those things. We have obligations in certain areas to ensure water compliance, right? As you know, discharge compliance. So the lagoon has a site-specific, a facility-based NPDES permit, a 5-year permit. And what that permit does is it forces us to do monitoring of the water that leaves the facility. And it actually also requires us to monitor the water that comes into the facility because it allows us to provide intake credits in certain areas. But on the overall, what it does is it forces us to be held accountable for, 20 different constituents. Mm-hmm. That if we exceed whatever the limitations are for those particular things, whether it be metals or chlorine or total suspended solids or enterococcus or whatever fecal coliform, whatever they're testing us on, we have a performance limit. And if our water exceeds that limit, we get a discharge notice. We get a notice of an exceedance. Mm-hmm. And we actually self-report those exceedances. Last year, we reported 70 exceedances. Under the statutes, there's a mandatory minimum penalty for any exceedance that is found by their enforcement division to be a violation, which isn't all of the exceedances. Sometimes we're able to argue, hey, that sample was taken during high tide, or that sample was later found by the lab to be faulty. So we're able to kind of work those numbers down, but typically a very good percentage of the exceedances result in a mandatory minimum penalty of $3,000. So if you have 70 violations and all of them are achieved and are viewed as mandatory minimum penalties, we owe $210,000 in fines. We're subject potentially next year to $210,000 of fines at the Seaside Lagoon based on board action. That money is actually would double our operating subsidy to run the facility. So what's changed this year is we had a time schedule order in place that the board issued to us that relaxed some of our limitations for certain categories. They are not reissuing that this year. But the good news, as I said, is they're not actually making the permit any more restrictive either. They're going to let us operate under last year's permit for another year. So what that boils down to is if last year is an indicator of this year's potential operations, we could see another season where we might have 70 or 75 violations. The time schedule order protected us for metals, certain metal counts. When we ran the historical data, we averaged anywhere from 3 to 5 metals violations a year that would have resulted potentially in concerns for us if we didn't have the TSO in place. So We're facing potentially 75 exceedances next year if last year's operation is an indicator of this year's practice. Every year's different. Water quality is constantly changing. That's why it's a completely untenable situation for us. We are completely beholden to whatever the quality of the water is when it enters the facility after being pumped out of AES's discharge pipes. So it could have all kinds of stuff in it that we have no responsibility for. But the minute we touch it and it comes in the lagoon and then we spit it out, we're responsible for those constituencies vis-a-vis the permit. We chlorinate and we dechlorinate. That's all we do and touch the water. So on one hand, we feel perfectly responsible for the chlorine when if we violate chlorine, it's because our folks put too much in. You know what? We got to kind of own that. That's the reality. But when we get hit for things like metals or other things that we don't have any role in playing, particularly when the lagoon might only have a few swimmers in it, like on a weekday before school's out, and the water comes out and it doesn't meet the water quality standard, and all we did is move it from one pipe to the next, that's a little frustrating. So, but that's what we experienced there. And the only way we're going to stop that is if we quit discharging water and we start circulating the system. But as you all know, that's going to be millions and millions of dollars to accomplish. But that's what we're designing. That's what we're focusing on doing. And hopefully once we get that project ready to bid, we find a few more dollars and we can get the thing built and stop this kind of water quality madness that we face every year. And that's only getting worse and more maddening, really. And ironically, it's the state fining the state. The Tidelands asset, they're fining us. The regional board's a state agency. They're fining this, effectively the State Lands Commission who owns the asset. We operate it in trust. It's like, it's kind of a crazy bureaucracy, but it's the world we live in and we have to operate under those conditions. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the Moonstone Park redevelopment? And one question I kind of had for the room and the commission, there's 2.1 million in it. Is that the right number? I lose track of what we've been carrying from Moonstone.
Originally, it was 2.4 million, but I don't know if they've tapped into the 2.4 for anything, as far as the money we got from Chevron.
I recall 2.1, but I would have to go back and look at what the exact number is.
There was a time when we had proposed, I think it was a year or two ago in the budget, to move $500,000 or something out of that and give it to the lagoon. I remember the commission saying, wait a minute, we got to put that back. The council took that action. So whatever's
That's
in there
back in,
is the amount that was supposed to be in there. There was a time, I think, where it might have been as high as 2.4 million, but there was design money spent, as I recall, against that account that may have dropped it to 2.1. I haven't looked at the balance in a little while, but whatever's there is kind of historically what's been there.
For the amenities plan?
No.
Okay.
Let me look at the carryover here.
Does it earn interest?
Well, it's earning more interest today than it used to. Our treasury is actually earning interest, so.
It's been in there for
Yeah.
10 years.
The interest doesn't
Sounds about right.
necessarily accrue to the capital account.
I know that. That's what it was kind of alluding to.
I'll confirm, but there hasn't been any withdrawal.
Regardless, what do you think happens there in this fiscal year?
I think, per the public amenities plan, right, there was sort of a listed priorities, kind of phase 1, phase 2, the lagoon, the promenade, we got the boat ramp, working on the studies for egress, ingress, and making sure that we've got the right vehicle and parking plan laid out. And we go out there and raise the money through, we think, a DBOG grant. So we've got pre-engineering work, then we go out and chase the grant. We then design the boat launch and then we build it, right?
Sorry, Moonstone Park.
I know. So I'm kind of getting to, so the public amenities, right? We've got all those things on the to-do list. As I understand it, the sort of Moonstone kind of trail behind that in order of sequence. So it's funded, it's there. I could see a scenario where if we strike out with grants and it's the only project on the list, it might all of a sudden see the light of day ahead of those other projects because they can't be funded, right? I mean, if we can't find money for the lagoon and we can't find money for the boat ramp, and all we have money for is Moonstone, my guess is the attention would turn there, just by logic.
Yeah, it's been a little bit frustrating. We get excited about other things, and this has been going on for longer than I've been on the commission. And then it got blocked by it got blocked by issues with the rest of the harbor because it could potentially have been a site for the boat ramp. So that linked it to everything else.
Sure.
That is cleared up, boat ramps moved away. So now it can move forward independently. And
It's just a matter
it'd
of
be
bandwidth.
great if it did.
Yeah,
You know,
and
it'd be
it's-
a great base hit. If,
Yeah, and it's one of those things is if we add another staff member, if bandwidth kind of clarifies, right? We got the Waterfront Education Center we're pre-designing. We've got the lagoon work. We've got 5 or 6 projects in the
Yeah.
queue and I want us to be, respectful and sensitive to reality, right? I don't want us to overpromise and underdeliver. I want us to be able to say, hey, these are projects we're going to get done this year. There's only one Greg, there's only one Dave.
Yeah.
We've got time. So, but honestly, after this year gets done with what's in the queue, if there isn't a big, chunk of grant money there waiting for us, I could see Moonstone starting to get some design attention. I really could, because it's just what's next to do and it's what's funded, right?
So I guess my disappointment in that was it's a 5-year capital plan. You'd expect to start seeing it at least in the 3rd year,
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, I think.
but it's not in there.
Well, I think on a practical basis, it's in there, it's in the capital plan, it's, the money's funded, right? It's still there, it's being
I didn't
carried over.
find,
Oh, it's a part of the carryover list. Yeah, it's not receiving new appropriations, but everything that's been funded in the past, with one exception, which is the dredging, it's being carried over and recommended for carryover. So it will continue to be there. It's just a matter of, do we have the ability to move it
No,
forward?
it's not, it's a
not
carryover.
programmed for a year. It's
Theoretically.
just a carryover.
But
Well, so when it's
theoretically,
carried over, it's
carryover.
immediately programmed.
Yeah.
It continues to be immediately programmed. It's just, but I'm just being candid with you saying, I don't know if we'll be able to get to it, right? We also have the climate resiliency plan we have to create. We've submitted a grant for that. You all know this. It's a lot to design even one project. It's another thing to design 6. We got really 6 in the queue. This would be 7. It's a matter of prioritization.
thanks.
The CIP, so are all the things, I didn't get to go through all of the amenities does it line up with the timeframes that we set forth in the amenities plan?
Not all the projects from the amenities plan are currently in the CIP list.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that Mike mentioned that were carried over from previous CIPs are still in there. Moonstone
Sure.
Park has been around for 10 years. It's continuously carried over. Seaside Lagoon is a project we're currently in contract with. That's in there. The boat launch is in there and has been in there for quite some time. Even before the amenities plan took off, there was a category in the CIP that said relocation of the boat launch. So ultimately, the ones that we're working on from the amenities plan were already in there. I think as the years progress, you'll start seeing some of the amenities plans that projects that aren't in there start creeping as new additions. Because even though it's a 5-year CIP, every year we update that CIP list.
Okay.
Yeah, the money will be there. Moonstone the 2.1 million is recommended for carryover to be immediately available again next fiscal year as part of that carryover. The challenge is just going to be when are we going to sit down, do an RFP for a design firm to come on and begin designing Moonstone Park. It's just, there's only so many designs we can manage at once. That's really what it comes down to.
So I'm thinking of like some of the short-term ones were more low-hanging fruit, like wayfinding and the boardwalk. Are those
That's a part.
included
Yeah,
other
so
places?
the Seaside Lagoon contract actually integrated 2 projects into one. And the promenade, which is that walkway,
Yeah.
it's the design of that, it's the wayfinding, it's the landscaping, it's the lighting. That's what SWA was retained to kind of produce for us.
For the design, but I mean for the implementation, if it's not in the CIP.
We'll need funding for that. But once we have the design, once we have the cost estimation, that becomes the obvious target for funding, right? We now have a number we can shoot for. And I think that's the next logical step. The lagoon design and SWA's work on the promenade will, I believe, be complete in the first half of the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
So we'll have a good sense of it soon.
Okay. And then the only other question I had was the budget mentions consideration for opportunities related to the Olympics and the World Cup, recommendations by May of '24. We haven't specifically addressed that with the harbor, maybe with the lagoon, other things, but I'm just wondering if that timeframe fits in with what kind of the durations of those projects would require,
Right.
Has that been looked at?
Not yet, no. That's a new strategic plan item that, was added, so we're, reacting and trying to get a game plan together. And I think this commission would have valuable input.
Yeah, I think, I think that's the latter part of the plan, as I remember,
Right.
kind of back end of our planning period this year is going to be 12 months. It's going to run through next May. Whatever comes out of those analyses will inform our budget next year for 24, 25. So I could see there being more information there to help us make those recommendations and appropriations. We still, though, we still need money. We need the revenues to kind of kick back up a little bit. The open water swim's been around that concept of maybe happening off our water's edge has been around. I know we've been kicking it around. There's obviously been successful swims over the last few summers that, have shown that I think we could easily host that event. So I could see the community and the council pushing that with the Olympics committee down the road. We'll keep tabs on that for sure.
Yeah, so I guess then the timeline is maybe there's this conversation or a subcommittee on that between now and next spring of
Right, I think
considerations.
what we're kind of committed to with city
How to
council
evolve.
is working through those ideas within the next 12 months. And I think a stop here to kind of get some ideas, update where we're at. And if you wanted to create a subcommittee at that time, you could. And we can have a working group and continue making progress like we do with the bevy of other subcommittees we have.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When, I'm going back to the budget, not the CIP. When we see the budgets for that, does it include the revenues from like Beach Life Festival, the fees and everything that come in from Beach Life Festival and Ranch Life?
Yeah, they've been incorporated into revenue deposits on an actual basis. The one thing that there's going to be a slight correction on is in the special events equation for the departments that spend money on those events, it's not historically been part of the budget. It's been kind of off book. It's going to be reimbursed. So we spend the money and then we collect the revenue. So it just sort of offsets the expense. This year, we're going to clean that up, show the anticipated special event expenditure because these are contractual obligations. We have a history now of having rebooted some of these special events.
Because it doesn't seem like the budget, the revenues jumped up with Beach Life.
Well, there's too much in there, I think, on an aggregate basis to maybe see that small spike, right? I know our hoteliers did well. I know we see increased revenues from the hotels through their leases when they do well. But, that's juxtaposed against a whole year of debits and credits and performance that is still, in some instances, a little depressed from where it was pre-COVID. And a lot of that has to just do with the leases that we have out there are finally turning over. We're updating them. We're getting new square footage rents. We're seeing those increase fairly significantly. We're getting ourselves back to market, and we're getting customers that are actually paying the way they should, right? There was a while where we basically had the COVID relief program going, where if a business couldn't pay, they weren't really held to account. And now a lot of those businesses are finally making restitution payments. They're back on their feet. They're playing catch up. So
Are the grants reflected in the revenues too?
the grants are, the COVID relief funds were collected last fiscal year.
No, I mean other grants like Department of.
If we know they're coming,
Voting and what?
intergovernmental relief, or the intergovernmental grants fund, if we know that if it's a known grant, we're going to receive COPS grant, some of the things we have in fire and police, you'll see some actual budgeted revenues and expenditures. If it's an unknown, if it's not certain, we tend to appropriate those grant funds in real time with a 4/5 budget resolution.
Like the 10 million from the state.
Precisely.
Seaside Lagoon, I don't, is it in the revenue side?
Well, it's not in the revenues, it's in your capital budget now.
Well, I know it's in the capital
Yeah.
budget, but when you look at the revenues, part of the,
Yeah, so the way that works is that's a reimbursement-based program. So we are reimbursed for expenses that we made. So the capital budget has the 10
so
million.
it's not reflected in
It's not
the,
reflected. So the $10 million anticipates intergovernmental grants revenue offsetting those
Okay.
expenses. It will
Okay, I
come
got it.
on an as-needed basis.
and when we see a parentheses in the CIP, is that money that was allocated from other place?
Well, it depends. Maybe give an example of the parentheses you're
I've
referring
been
to.
jumping around, so I don't have it in front of me anymore, but
If it's in the CIP transmittal letter, typically it's probably just giving you a snapshot of what the breakdown is for the funds itself.
well, like I know one of them had a parentheses and then it had a non-parentheses number underneath. I didn't know if that was carry forward.
Yeah, no, in project recommendation, if it's in the transmittal letter, it's meant to make it easier to read. There's no accounting metric there in the CIP transmittal letter that would reflect debits or credits.
I don't think that's where it was, but I don't have it. Wait, I've been jumping between too many documents.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of, you're not going to see revenue figures or funding figures the same way in the capital budget that you would in the operating budget.
Downloading.
Any other comments, questions?
Okay.
So my big question is, and I'll phrase this from personal experience, and I should have said something the last meeting. I talked to Greg about this. I didn't think about it till I was on my way home. I refinanced my mortgage, and yeah, sometimes you get a little cash back because of whatever money, how much is being refinanced. They put a little extra in for fees and whatever, you end up getting some money back. But generally speaking, you've reduced your month-to-month expenses. Nobody hands you a check, hey, you saved this much amount of money, and hand you a check. You see it month to month, year to year in your monthly expenses. What's the deal with PERS? Why is it only a one-time savings, as you reported last meeting, of $4.5 million? Because your city treasurer has reported something else.
No, well, what I think you might be referring to is when we talk about the future savings, PERS is tricky. We were on the precipice of what we're going to be known, a very difficult 20-year amortization schedule that would have been owed to PERS for our unfunded accrued liability debt. And it was on a one-way track up, and then it was going to be on a one-way track down after year, whatever it was, 2037 or something. So when we refinanced our UAL, our debt, we fixed our payment at that year's annual debt service amount, and we avoided all of those costs. So over the next 28 years, we saved over $100 million in what would have been UAL payments. So it's future savings. It's not current savings. So from a budget standpoint, our annual debt service payment, basically we flatten it out. So imagine you had an adjustable rate mortgage and your mortgage payment over the next few years was going to continue to go up and up and up. And you refinanced to borrow on a 30-year fixed basis at the payment that you were making the prior year. That's effectively what we did. And the real value is when you owe PERS, unfunded accrued liability, you're charged a 7% discount rate.
Right.
When we refinanced, we lowered our financing costs to 2.8%.
So you didn't actually lower. I understand what you're saying. You were facing an incredible spike in future PERS payments that was probably going to be followed with a declining
After an
amount.
extended period of time.
After
But
20
even then,
years.
it would be years before that decline would have ever been lower than what we were paying.
And I remember going through this when I was on city council, and we were looking at the projected PERS increases, and we knew it was like a sledgehammer waiting to hit us in the head. But year-to-year savings, so what we spent last year on PERS versus what we're projected to spend in this next year, higher, lower, the same?
Well, our UAL component's the same, but remember, that's only, as you know, in your prior role, that's one component of the employer's cost.
Right.
So each year, we receive an actuarial from PERS that tells us next year's employer cost rate for a PEPRA employee or a classic member employee are the following amounts. Those amounts have not gone down in quite some time. So on a percentage of payroll basis, we are paying equal to or greater than, depending on the particular position in our organization, than we did in the prior year. But what is helpful is we're not paying that plus whatever would have been an extraordinary $2.5 million increased UAL payment. And it was those, to your point, we were getting hit with, we had a big sledgehammer coming, but we were getting hit in the shins harder and harder and harder each year over the last several years, which has really forced us to direct all new tax increment to those UAL payments as opposed to salaries and benefits or projects or whatever else, right? That's what's diverted most of our funds over the last 8 years.
So would it be fair to say that you're budgeted, because you budgeted a number for PERS in your budget? I mean, I understand, like all budgets, things happen, you find out some actual costs might be different than what you budgeted for. But what you budgeted is at or above slightly what was budgeted or what was paid last year.
It is. It's at or above, but it's very slight. And I will say it's a tough thing to answer specifically each and every year, because depending on the number of classic employees that might retire and are replaced by Pepper employees, there's a spread there. So the Pepper costs are going up slightly as PERS does reruns its annualized actuarials. But we do see some benefit when we replace a classic employee with a Pepper employee.
So really, it's better, I think, to explain the savings as we have a savings against what we projected our future costs would have been otherwise.
And not just projected, but those were, I mean,
Yeah,
those were known. That's not, I mean, it
Yeah,
truly.
I'm not trying to say that it was something done on the back of an envelope. I totally understand.
I can unequivocally tell you by refinancing our UAL the way we did. So not using the word pension cost necessarily, but just saying by refinancing our unfunded accrued liability costs, we will save the city over the next 20 plus years, $100 million.
What are cities doing that don't do that?
They are struggling. They're cutting positions. They're borrowing in different ways. They are struggling. And we couldn't have timed it any better.
So to it, what part of this was thinking down the road, capital, as it relates now to capital improvement projects. As a degreed, certified, professional engineer for multiple decades, I have a lot of respect for what engineers know. I also have a lot of respect for what they don't know. I know that 10 years ago, serving on the council, we had a report that the parking structure had a projected life of 5 to 10 years. And I've done a little research on the subject. Basically, and I'm getting this from multiple people, they're scared to go into the parking structure. They look at what's happened to some parts of it with the concrete slabs falling off, et cetera. One only has to look at the news with, Iowa, the apartment building that was certified as, oh no, it's safe, go ahead, keep living there, boom. The parking garage in New York, not to mention the condos in Florida. I guess what I would like to see going forward, I would like to actually have a presentation from the engineering company that we've had do inspections, or our own engineer staff, I don't really care who, so that we can be assured as to what is the projected remaining lifespan of the parking structure, because I think that's an important aspect looking at the 5-year plan. I've got some specific questions I want to ask with regards to exactly what testing have they done, how thorough has the testing been done, because I know what testing should be done for a concrete structure in that situation. I want to give the public some confidence with regards to that the parking structure has been tested thoroughly and there is no issues with it, with the corrosion of the rebar and infiltration of the concrete with salt water, et cetera, because we know that that's been part of the problem with it. And what steps, how long we expect it to last, what's our game plan for replacement. I mean, Seaside Lagoon and everything's great, so are boat ramps, but at the end of the day, that parking structure, nothing happens down there if you don't have a place to park.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's as pivotal as anything. It's why last year we recommended general fund money to support it, which is the first time in my history here
Yep.
we ever recommended that level of general fund support for.
I guess I just want to be assured we're not putting Band-Aids on it and we're not kicking the can down the
Well, what I
road.
might suggest, it's certainly something worth exploring and worth having assurance for. In talking to our engineering team recently, I believe we expect the next round of plans and specifications for parking structure repair, which, as I mentioned earlier, are really going to be focused on seismic retrofitting in the fun factory space. That's the next focus. Are due back to us in, I believe, September. When we are ready to go, and when we're starting to craft those, it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring those specs to the commission to talk about the focus of the project, the scope of work, and then we can invite Walker down, who's our designer, same firm who did the testing, it's the firm that's designing the next round of repair, have them come down and give you that presentation. We had a presentation from Walker last year with some of that detail, but I'm sure they'd be happy to come down and give the Harbor Commission an opportunity to ask questions. In my view, they can't be questioned enough. I mean, Walker's very reputable. I think they're doing a great job. They're a major firm in the area, one of the chief experts. But yeah, I think those questions are good. We should be inviting them.
I'm not trying to impugn anybody's, it's just, like I said, there's people who have concern about it. And I think the more we're throwing it out there to the public, and quite frankly, I've been educating myself with regards to what are the specific tests that should be used to identify certain issues with the parking structure. How widely have we investigated issues with it?
Sure.
And listen, I will say this, we've spent more money repairing the parking structure in the last few years than we ever have before.
Yep.
What I've learned in this same journey is that these numbers are somewhat dependent on your level of ongoing investment and rehabilitation. You can preserve and extend the life of some of these structures if you spend the money on them. Now, the cost benefit analysis at some point intersects, and you have to wonder about those questions. There was a time when Walker was here talking about it, though, the cost of a new concrete structure, we used to assume that was a $50 million expense. I think if you took that out to bid 2 years ago, it'd probably be a $150 million expense. So, repair is really your only option at that point. So it's a variable area. And then one other thing to always keep in mind, which is why we focused on seismic retrofits this year, is the parking structure is built to a seismic standard. That's a fixed number. You could do some stuff to shore it up, but it was built when it was built to a certain code, and that's even if we put money into repair, spalling, and cathodic protection, and all the stuff that we're doing and painting, that's not improving its seismic resiliency. I mean, the shear wall work that we're actually starting to do might do that, which is good.
There is things you can do in a retrofit method to improve the seismic stability of any structure for that matter. The funny thing is about concrete, not technically, scientifically, it actually strengthens with age, the older it gets. When they were doing modernization of the high school, they did an extensive analysis of the buildings, old science building and whatnot, built in the 1930s as part of the California Conservation Corps. And they originally thought, this was going to find it deficient compared to local codes. That thing was built like a tank, and it is one of the most structurally sound structures in Redondo High, as it's approaching almost 100 years old. So, yeah, it doesn't have to go downhill depending upon the conditions that it's subjected to. I just, I said, just want to be able to ask the questions and have the information out there to the public.
Yeah.
Well, and it's great. Ideally, you're the ambassadors on these issues, right? People are going to come to you. Hey, what do you think about the parking structure, right? I mean, you're the Harbor Commission. So I think it's a fair question. I think we probably can arrange for that.
Yeah.
September's what I was told is the next round, maybe a presentation in that month or October, maybe even a bit before that, depending on their timing. I don't know.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll go again. Sorry. Some of what you guys said jogged a couple other thoughts for me. I've been at some of Walker's presentations to the council. They've been great, and, getting them here would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Just to, tell people more what's going on. As part of that, or as part of, sea level rise assessment, can we shoehorn into the budget this year or some year an assessment of the central and north basins in the harbor? A couple years ago, we did a good assessment of the hardscape around the south basin, found what we found. That's the smallest basin. And then we've done good assessments of the concrete around the pier itself. But to my knowledge, we've never looked at the other two basins or the North Galveston Wall.
Yeah, I think our climate resiliency plan, I think the goal is to try to do some of that.
Great, okay.
That's the goal.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
We're out there, we've written the grant application, I think, right?
Yeah.
We've got it in, we're waiting on the funds, hopefully award. But yeah, the goal would be to hire an engineer to study the impacts of sea level rise, but also the structural integrity of the.
Yeah, and that's
very short.
something we've contracted out in the past.
Yeah.
So, hopefully it's not, too much of a burden on
Yeah, I think
existing
that's what
staff
we
to
would
cut
do
somebody
is-
loose on it.
Add it to the scope of work,
Great, okay.
Just getting through some of the backlog is going to help us here. We're going to have more
Yeah.
bandwidth, more engineering time, the dredging, the sport fishing pier, the work down at Fire Station 3, the docks, the pump out, those are active projects. We actually have on the land side that are harbor fund related, tidelands or uplands, but our wastewater fund, we've got two major sewer pump station replacements coming on board. Like between the two of them, like $6 million worth of work, $7 million worth of work to replace both of those stations down there. The one on Portofino and then the one on Marina Way.
Yeah, that's been in front of us.
Yeah.
That's out of wastewater funds.
Yes.
So you had mentioned the wayfinding. I'm not sure how soon wayfinding happens. I know it's being studied right now. I'm not sure when we would, put out an RFP and execute it. But is it possible to study it throughout the harbor or only in the limited amenities plan area? Because the amenities plan was limited to the waterfront area and Seaside Lagoon got tacked on, hoping for a quick base hit. And now we're doing a follow-on with wayfinding and, the harbor's a maze from end to end. If you do wayfinding only in the middle, it would be really nice to connect to it on both ends. It'd be really nice to connect it to harbor and something down at Torrance Circle. So
I can chime in on that. So we've actually reached out to SWA, who is doing the wayfinding. We've asked them to include in their scope of work the connection pieces.
Excellent.
And while they're not going to be subject to constructing that, at least our Public Works Division will know what the design is, how much it's estimated to cost, and in the
Great.
future, we can work towards that.
great.
Yeah, we may even have to spend a little bit of money cleaning up signage before the full study's done. There's.
Right, yeah.
There's, our old directory signs that are down there now are not helpful. We've talked about maybe, in fact, there's a budget response report on the cost to maybe do some sort of static digital signage, not like
Yeah.
scrolling signs, but some of the more modern stuff that can be replaced, edited. New blade signs potentially on the boardwalk to try to make businesses more prominent. So we may have to do kind of a Band-Aid effort or try to do something to improve the situation while we're waiting on the bigger study.
Okay. I didn't see anything in here on the educational facilities, so I'm guessing what's happening there is we're just trying to continue to lease it out as is,
We've got
studying what could be there, and then hoping, an angel shows up to turn it into something great.
That's pretty much it. So first order business concepts, I think they're going to go back to the council in July.
18th, yeah.
So the idea is to have the Waterfront Education Center kind of at least conceptually blessed. That gives us a vision that we can go out and try to fundraise for. In the meantime, right, we try to kind of keep the lights on, make a few bucks, with a small restaurant lease and pay the bills for a little while, recognizing that, making very clear that the space is going to be, eventually torn down for this type of use. So that's the strategy right now. But it starts with the concepts and,
Right.
I think we're doing some marketing of the space for prospective restaurant reuse on a short-term basis. I don't know how many hits we've had, but, that's being talked about.
Last question I'll ask is there anything in here for bike paths and getting down to the harbor by bicycle?
There is some money currently in the CIP to help with directional signage in the interior of the city to get to the major assets. We have some money for that. There's a program that the COG is working on to try to direct people, through a bike network, alternative modes of transportation network that might help get people oriented and directed down to the
I thought we were
waterfront.
out of the COG.
What's that?
Aren't we out of the COG?
No, we're out of the League of California Cities right
Okay.
now. Yeah, not the COG. COG's the kind of the local council area of
Okay.
governments. So there's a couple of initiatives to help with bike wayfinding from the interior of the city down here, but not any major effort.
Okay. So it's still very piecemeal when a
Yeah,
street
kind
gets
of work in
fixed?
progress. I think we're trying to get bike network sort of laid. I mean, we're making progress, when we build out Beryl and we do some stuff. There's work happening, but it's slow.
Yeah, they have the bike lane on part of Burl, then as soon as you get to PCH, it stops.
Yeah, PCH, we just aren't ready to stripe that yet. That's
Oh,
coming
okay.
next.
Got
There
it.
is I think a striping plan that's going to hit the streets here in the next 6 months or so on the west side of PCH. Problem is when you cross PCH, you got to get a Caltrans permit and things get a little bit slow when we do that. So that work's, I think, happening, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
That's all I've got. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I got a couple things. Decision package 68 was the one where you were talking about the strategic, what do we do with leasing in the harbor?
Yeah, adding to our real
But
estate.
it's not really worded that way. It says it's critical during that development, but I don't think a consultant's really gonna, do we want all bars down there? Or do we want a mix? And then back into how we do that.
This is to give us the money. Then we can bring the consultants on, then we'll manage their scope of work, right? So we can talk about what the.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that a consultant, you'd have to feed that to the
Oh,
consultant.
we'll
You know,
have to.
Probably make the most out of doing all craft beer pubs down there, right?
Yeah, no, we'll need to, when we have the resources, we'll be bringing the prospective team in and saying, hey, here's the vision, here's what we're thinking about. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm concerned about how we get to that, so we hand them something. I'm also concerned that it seems like, putting out a contract takes a long time. And there's things happening now where we're leasing stuff out. And so we need two things, a short-term strategy
Yeah.
with what's open today and what may pop up soon, because I kind of feel we're getting too many bars and not enough restaurants or other stuff.
Sure.
And we should be taking advantage of the skate park to kind of change, what's going on down there. And second, and we talked about it the last meeting. I don't know if you were here when we talked about it, but we did a great amenities plan. Now it's time to look at the commercial long-term plan and what do we want to do? Should we put a market hall at the end of Basin 3 going south? Because that was a popular amenity in the Center Cal project. And, or are we just going to keep these little things, all bifurcated with inefficient use of space that actually harbors, activities we don't necessarily want down there because it's good hiding places.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything for anything like that. And I don't want to go out and do a amenities plan and pay whatever that cost to do that. I think we can form a subcommittee or a group between city staff and some residents or commission members and come up with something to present to the council that could then go to a consultant for.
Yeah, that's the idea. This is meant to get the money set aside, and then we've got to work through the work plan. And I do agree, there's some immediate requirements and opportunities that we have to evaluate, and council is evaluating those, I think, as they arise on a shorter term basis. And then the goal here is to create a strategy that I believe will have Harbor Commission input, council input, of course, that talks about more of that true kind of remove and replace those opportunities where you can really bring, a variety of different prospective master lessees in with new ideas. So there's sort of a two-prong approach. We didn't want to get too specific on exactly what that approach is in this. We're trying to just get the money set aside, and then we've got to kind of put our heads together and decide how we want to execute.
Okay. Second is rebuilding the sport fishing pier. I kind of feel like if we had repaired it back when, it would have been cheaper than tearing it out. Wouldn't necessarily be optimal from a configuration perspective. But my fear now is it's ripped out, it's never going back. Because there's nothing anywhere that says a timeline of the city's committed to rebuilding a pier by this date.
Well, the amenities plan calls it out as a priority, but it's a little lower on the priority list,
Yeah, but there's
granted.
nothing funding wise and it's easy.
Correct.
I mean, just like the Mole B plan, we've kicked that down the can for over a decade now.
Right.
And without any, and there's money on that.
Did we lose the benefit of having the pylons still in the water as a,
No.
As an
environmental-
environmental.
yeah.
No, the shadings, once we lost the roof deck, the shading changes, it's likely that any replacement sport fishing pier would have probably forced a full analysis
Yep.
anyway. We had looked
Okay.
into that.
Threshold for the environmental review was pretty low in terms of having to redo all the environmental, which is the
Oh.
benefit of keeping some of that stuff.
Right.
And because that threshold was so low, it was, well, we're gonna have to deal with it anyway, so.
So that's not just my concern. I've heard that from a number of people.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a subterfuge plan to just get rid of it.
No,
Because we know it wasn't in the original Center Cal thing, right? The original Center Cal drawing came out without a sport fishing pier, a big uproar, and then it went back in. But now, it's gone and there's nowhere that there's no commitment for the city to.
Well, there's no money that's, dedicated for it, but it is a part of an approved vision for the waterfront. So the amenities plan does call it out specifically as an amenity that we want.
yeah, I mean, that's the best thing we got right now. I
Yeah.
mean, the problem is there's so many needs and so few funds. It's a matter of figuring out what we can and can't do and in what time frame.
Yeah,
The
okay.
sport fishing pier, if it were rebuilt and it's in the glory that it could be based on the amenities plan, it'd be fantastic. But it's an amenity that we're at some point gonna have to figure out how to fund.
Well, I frankly think the workshop's oversold what it could be. We'd never be able to
Maybe.
put all that stuff in there. But, going back to decision package 60, I'm also concerned, having been on the subcommittee with the Seaside Lagoon guys, first thing they came back with is a Taj Mahal overdeveloped, canyon looking down on a little dinky seaside lagoon that we'd never be able to afford, nor would we want it. And so I think it's important when we write these consulting agreements that, it goes back to having a vision to start with that you paint to them. And I know I spoke to them about that before we even kicked it off, and it still came back with that.
Well, I mean, I think
Overly-
you guys are, I mean, I haven't even seen them. You were all going through the design charrette process, right? So on one hand, you want to lay out sort of a vision for them, but at the same time, you want to give them a little bit of architectural licensing to maybe come back and surprise you with some concepts that you might not have conceptualized. But the whole point, right, is you go through that vetting process and go, nah, let's focus on
But it
these
seems like
things.
And I don't want to beat on it. I don't want to beat on it. I think we could have written it that it was much clearer and we wouldn't have gotten the Taj Mahal. And what I didn't see innovation on was the stuff that we need innovation on. So.
Well, hopefully that direction was given and they've got an opportunity.
And I'm
to-
glad we changed it
pivot.
from doing a public thing right out the gate to doing some course correction before we go out to the public. 'Cause-
Well, the difference is usually that kind of analysis that you're going through with the subcommittee would happen with just a staff committee.
Yeah.
And now you've got the committee, the commission involved, and
This
you're
stuff
getting
happens
more
on every
perspectives
project.
on this, so we can hopefully avoid some of that, kind of timeline and pitfall later. So that's the goal.
And the last point, I think, there's some confusion over the term harbor master. Some people view the harbor master as the water side, the harbor patrol king, right? And I don't know if that when you use that term, whether that's what I was talking to you about, and I think what we said was there needs to be one voice for the land and the seaside of the harbor, right?
Okay, yeah.
And that doesn't exist today.
Well,
And it didn't during the Center Cal debacle.
so tell me how that's different than what we've had in place in the last 30 years.
Well, like go to Mulby boat ramp. Fire department, fire chief said one thing, harbor patrol said totally opposite.
Right.
And the land side had no comment on it.
Right, well, and the challenge, of course, there is the harbor patrol is technically the fire chief is overseeing harbor patrol, right? So the concept is harbor patrol,
The
landside
harbor, we have
leasing.
a harbor enterprise budget. There should be and that includes the land and seaside of all the operations. We need somebody responsible for that so you can tie together the vision and you don't have to go to different departments
Yeah.
to piece it together and they're not working at odds.
Which I fully understand, and as you and I have talked about privately, that a lot of it, I think, can be solved with better communication among the operating and affected departments, particularly with waterfront. The more resources waterfront has, the easier, I think, the more time ultimately Greg has to be the visioner, spearhead what's happening in the waterfront, and ultimately be effectively the czar of what's occurring. But no harbor master nor waterfront economic development director are going to have the ability to supervise public safety operations as a single unit. That we can't have police, fire, leasing, maintenance all managed by a single individual. That under POBAR and all the public safety law, employment law, all the things that govern somebody's staffing.
I understand you can't have cops under that, but
Yeah.
you can
So
certainly
those
have
are
harbor
difficult.
patrol and harbor master under a harbor director.
You could.
I mean,
Harbor
that's what it
patrol-
is in most harbor.
Harbor patrol without a safety component, right? Without that
Harbor
rescue
patrol as it exists in most.
component. Yeah. Well, which is being studied, right? That's what the strategic plan objective is all
But
about.
what I'm talking about is when you're planning this whole economic development for down here and you're going, well, let's put the launch ramp over here and you get a different thing from the harbor patrol than you do from the fire department than you do from Greg, that shouldn't be able to exist.
Right. Well, and that's fairly disjointed. In an ideal world, Greg is able to filter everybody's input and come up with a unified plan.
Right, but that's not what
Supported.
happens. The fire department gets its own
Yeah.
statement and harbor patrol got buried because they're under the fire department.
Well, and that's,
And there ought to be, you need to tie the water side, like the mooring leases are done by the land side, right?
yeah.
That's a on-water thing.
Used to
It
be
should
done-
be integrated.
Yeah, it was supposed to be done by Harbor Patrol technically.
Yeah, but then they didn't want to do it, so, or didn't have the manpower, whatever,
So,
the
Yeah, and
resources.
then we didn't have a lot of people come in to ask for it, or so they told me. Whether that was, by.
But there's a lot of
interest
stuff
or
when you're
not.
designing the land side that affects your water operations side.
Sure.
And that should be an integrated function. And if you we're treating the harbor as an enterprise. From a budget perspective, we had to treat it as an enterprise from an operations and planning perspective
Yeah, I
as
mean,
well.
in my view, ideally, right, you've got enough resources under the waterfront department to have a comprehensive understanding of both land and marina operations in a way that you have a singular gatekeeper, right? The two exceptions being whatever safety components are occurring. Now, depending on Harbor Patrol's function in the long term, I mean, I suppose there's some different options there, but that is working hand in hand with the department director's vision for the entire space, right? That's the goal. It's ensuring that there's enough resource there to make informed decisions that are comprehensive and work and hang together contextually. I think I feel good about our future.
I just see the history. And we put the harbor patrol into the fire department and now they're gone for 40 minutes to an hour at a time responding to landside stuff. There's nobody covering the harbor.
I don't think that happens maybe as much as people claim.
I think it happens whenever they respond to a call, there's nobody to take a call on the water.
Yeah.
Whenever they get called away from the harbor department, they're not responding on the water.
Right,
Now, they
well,
may
true.
hand it off to Baywatch, but is that what you want?
Well, and Baywatch doesn't respond to issues inside the harbor. They don't do that. So, yeah.
They do. I got towed by Baywatch in the harbor.
Well, that
So,
may have been
that's not
under
true.
distress. They're not supposed to, from what I understand.
But they could be out on a call down at Avenue C on some rescue. And then you got nobody monitoring the harbor at all. And what we've lost through the years is the expertise of the harbor patrol, right? They're not diving. They're not able to raise up a sunken boat, any of those kind of things. They've lost all those quals. And they're not doing the safety checks they used to do.
Right.
Because they're getting trained to be paramedics and respond to landside emergencies. They're not getting the money to train and the time to train on the water side. And that's just an example of what happens when you trifurcate whatever, you separate all these different functions to departments that have nothing to do with the water.
Right. You have your priorities change. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's limited budget, and they go, I'm a fire department, I'm not a harbor thing, so.
Sure.
And then whenever they do something there, they want budget for it from the harbor enterprise,
Right.
right? That's what we saw with the police. All of a sudden, oh, we need a police boat. Well, we got the police boat for free, but then maintenance on the police boat comes out of our,
Sure. Yeah, you
we got to keep a slip for them. We
yeah,
got, you know.
you write a grant, you get one-time funds, and then, you've got the long-term upkeep. to
Yeah,
manage. Sure.
so that's my concern with that, and that's my concern when we talk
Yeah.
about harbor master versus a harbor enterprise director that really operates like most harbors.
Yeah, I mean, and I
California.
think that, as you and I have talked about this, I think that, it starts with kind of how does patrol operate, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the fundamental concerns is sort of what their focus and prioritization is. And then how does that intersect with what the department on a broader basis does and doesn't do and how we plan. I think with our team today, I feel good about the communication that happens between the department heads and the various departments. And I would hope and expect that we would avoid some of the independent kind of siloed impression of operations that we've had in the past. So it's something definitely thinking about. And
But I think if we turn it over to county, it's even going to be worse.
well, there's
Because they're going to respond to beaches and harbors or.
well, they would, like anybody,
Or county
right?
fire department,
Everybody
and
does
we
what-
won't have any control over them.
Everybody does what they prefer to do, right, at the end of the day, right? What's their priority? So, we'll be studying that as part of the objective. There'll be a comprehensive analysis that'll compare and contrast what some of the other kind of leisure harbors look like, how they operate, and how they intersect functionally, and should give us some ideas on
Now, if you
what
look
might
at,
make sense.
Dana Point, it's a county
Just a county
thing, and the
facility.
county runs it. If you look up at Oxnard,
And how they run it's important, right? Are they running it with multiple departments? Are they running it with a singular
not a city
department?
function, it's a separate,
Right. Well, no, right.
has its own commission that runs it, and
Yeah, and then how does the county,
So
and
we're-
how do they manage their operations, right? Do they have it under separate divisions reporting to a commission? Do they have it under a singular person that's in charge of all things? Do they run it through multiple county departments?
but I think you'll find that they're under one organization that's the mother organization.
Right.
They may outsource some of the stuff like police,
Right,
sheriff's on the water, but they have their own harbor patrol too.
right, that's what
They have their
I'm
they have their
curious
own
about.
fire department in the water. There's a
Yeah, well,
harbor.
and that's like what LA Harbor does, similar, so that's what to me is interesting is how, regardless of the agency, the municipality, the county, the city, whatever it is, what's curious to me is department by department, how are they ultimately providing service? And is it unified? Is it running in parallel, reporting to a singular structure at a higher level? What are those suggestions? So that's what the objective will analyze ultimately.
Well, beat
Sorry,
that
last
dead horse,
thing?
I'm done.
Okay.
Sorry.
I had two more things. Looking back at what, I don't see explicit, but maybe it's part of your budget. In the short term, things from the amenities plan. So one is the traffic study. And one is interior paths, bicycle connections, and I guess three things. Construction of the promenade and the nodes. I guess on the first, the traffic study, are you waiting to get funding for?
So the traffic study, parking
yeah,
study,
before.
and demand study is all associated with the boat launch.
Yeah,
The grants don't really kick in until you're ready to construct and design the boat launch. So we do have money in the existing CIP list for the entitlement process and for those necessary studies.
okay,
So that we can move forward to the grant process where
right.
the state takes over
Okay,
and pays
great.
for this thing.
Great,
Yeah, we've got, 400,000 for that?
okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, appreciate you coming back.
Thank you so much. It was
Real
really
quick,
helpful.
just happened to be scanning through some of our special revenue funds. Given the refinancing of PERS, is there really a need for a CalPERS reserve fund?
Well, you might recall the Budget Finance Commission, myself and the council, we actually renamed it. It's still shorthand CalPERS Reserve, but it's really become CalPERS pension salary benefit enhancement fund. So it's effectively become a separate general fund reserve account that we can use as bridge funding for periods of investment in employees that may not match structural revenues, to kind of give ourselves time to get there. So I thought when we retained the fund and we actually added $2 million to it last year, we might need it this budget to make investment, because we have, as I've said to many of the commissions, I may not have said that as much directly to the Harbor Commission in your purview, but we have performed a class and comp study for our municipal, our civilian employees across the organization. We are in many areas well below market. We need to make an investment in those employees. There's actually a decision package to do that, to be upfront and transparent about that investment and make sure we're capturing that in ongoing expenditures and not just waiting to budget for it later based on the outcome of negotiations. So that investment is needed. I thought we might need to use and bridge some of the costs of that in the first few years with the pension fund. We were strong enough in core revenue. We've gotten tight enough in our operating budgets to be able to maybe avoid that this year. We may need it next or the year after. But it's there is effectively a general fund reserve account at this point.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up because I remember a decade ago, the city of Redondo Beach was analyzed as they were analyzing numerous other cities with regards to their financial stability. And first shot out of the gate, Redondo Beach did not get a very good score. In part because on paper, they were looking at we having 1 month of reserves, 8.33%. But unlike many other cities, we have other reserve funds like the Vehicle Replacement Fund, the
IT
Technology
equipment, Emergency
Fund,
Communications Fund.
et cetera, which are all really general fund funds. There is nothing that keeps the city council from drawing from those funds and using, frankly, for any purpose. Contrasting that is funds that can only be used for a specific purpose, such as the Solid Waste Fund, the Sewer Fund, some of the local Measure M funds and whatnot that you get, grants and whatnot, can only be used for very specific purposes. But these other funds are really another form of reserve.
And when you add them all together, we actually have because typically the credit agencies are looking for 20% reserve. When you add them all together, we actually are close to that. I mean, now with the pension reserve fund where it's at, the economic contingency fund and those other funds, we're at over $20 million of reserve money, and which would be about 20% of general fund operations. So we are well reserved in that sense. I will say this, there is a big likelihood, in fact, it's a certainty, that next year, as in the 24-25 fiscal year, we will owe PERS a supplemental unfunded accrued liability payment. The nice part about having this account now is that rather than now building that into a 20-year amortization schedule that we pay a discount rate on, we conceivably have the funds to write that in a single check. So that money's there for bridge funding, for operations. It's also potentially the piggy bank in the event that we get hit with a supplemental. And word on the street is we may get hit with back-to-back supplementals because of performance, not just in the 21-22 fiscal year end, but 22-23 fiscal year end, unless the stocks really swing up here in the last month. We're looking at probably 2 consecutive underperforming years for PERS.
Your previous boss, when I was on city council, loved putting money aside in special unique funds as reserves. And can't say as I blame him, but, and that was the foresight in the case of the PERS, was a fund that was created when I was on city council because we projected the insanity that was going to
ensue. And we've tackled the biggest share of that through the obligation bond. But we will get hit with supplementals. Anytime PERS performs at a rate less than 7%, theoretically, we will receive a UAL. And we're due for one this August that will be effective 24-25. So, yeah, we could see about half that money disappear really quickly.
All right. Thank you. That's it.
Sorry, one last quick one, I hope.
Is the Falcon program still in?
Yes.
We had cut back on that during COVID because there were fewer people down there and we were trying to save money and we saw, fewer food scraps and so fewer seagulls. I was down there recently, just overseeing the pier from, up at Old Tony's, which is a good viewpoint to look over the whole area. And I just saw more seagulls on roofs than I'd seen before. So you may want to ask, the pier businesses, when you meet with them, if it's still okay. This may be before your time, but there was a point when there were so many, nests up there and rats coming in that it was unserviceable.
Completely
And so this
remember.
made a big difference.
Falcon program was, I think it was a big win in the budget years ago. We put it back in as a core expenditure last year. That's why you don't see an appropriation this year.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure if it was at the full amount or back to just 1 or 2 days a week or month or what we'd cut it back to.
We were flying it at
It's 4 days a week right now.
4 days a week.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we were back to
Okay,
normal.
cool.
But I don't know, we had a multi-year agree with the Falconer, right? I thought.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so
It's a
Okay,
5-year
4
deal
days,
right now.
4 days sounds like the full amount.
Yeah.
maybe
But I just saw seagulls on roofs, which I haven't seen for a long time.
yeah, it's a good question.
I can look into it.
Maybe the bird was, took a vacation.
These things happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, if there's any particular comments you'd like me to share with the council, we do a budget response report that we kind of wrap the budget up with, where we pass along either any motions made or letters or the like. I know this commission has submitted letters already going into the budget, so we can certainly just resubmit that if the commission likes. But if there's anything specific or any specific advice or comments you want to give to the council, you can do that tonight, or you could draft a follow-up letter. It's completely up to the commission. How little or not, how much or how little you want to counsel them on the budget.
Thanks. And that timeline is you need the letter by Thursday?
We do a letter Thursday morning would be,
Yeah, so we get a
Ideal.
packet for next Tuesday's.
I want them to have the weekend to read everything.
I think before we decide anything, we had to hear if there's any public comment.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Probably is.
Get Mike off the hot seat.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're ready for any comments from the public on this item L1.
Mark Hansen, King Harbor Boater. Hello, council, Greg, Dave. First up, I want to just touch on the breakwater discussion. Dave did a great thing and contacted me and says, hey, can they park in your parking lot? I said, well, of course, we'd love to have them. So I brought some donuts, and then later on, the mayor and I invited them into the yacht club for lunch. 4 of them came in for lunch. So we definitely rolled out the red carpet. So thanks for setting that up. I understand from Geraldine that they're going to do the dredging on June 24th. And when we happened to be at low tide, it was just absolutely perfect because everybody could see, the dredging standpoint also. And, she mentioned that they were originally, I guess, going to meet over at Mole B, but she saw that and says, Mark, can we use your parking lot again? I said, oh, absolutely, absolutely. So we'll be quite happy to host them with that. I'll tell you that, afterwards I go in the club and I'm talking to various of our members, and I'm telling them, oh yeah, the Army Corps was out here looking great, we're making progress. And the subject came up as, well, sea level rise, aren't we supposed to raise everything 4 feet? And how are we going to raise that whole seawall that the city's responsible for? And, I basically shrugged my shoulders, so just be aware that the people are asking about that, going to say, well, wow, that's got to cost tens of millions if you tried to raise all those rocks and that whole seawall, up 4 feet higher. Anyway, I wanted to touch just briefly on the discussion about a harbor director / harbor master, which of course overlaps with the whole county discussion. And when the city manager was asking a question about, well, how is what you were describing, Commissioner Light, different from what we're doing now? And so I think maybe that discussion has to go much further with the city manager, because I was on the edge of my seat. I want to get up and say, well, yeah, this is a very, very different thing. A lot of us have talked about forever that there may be an independent harbor director who has harbor management experience, recreational boating experience, to take nothing away from our existing institutions. The waterfront department does a great job on all of our leasehold works. The harbor master does a great job on public safety. You guys do an absolutely great job on CUPs and many, many other things. But of course, you're not operational. You can only get to give advice. So for the 24 years I've been involved, we've said for years, it's weird. This harbor, there's nobody really in charge overall. And certainly from the recreational standpoint, I know Commissioner Light has made the comment in the past that the city's really not involved with a lot of the fun things that happen in the harbor. It's run by volunteers, and that's been a clear, thing that we could work on, right? To, get the city down there and understand and work with us on a lot of stuff that's being run by volunteers. Great point about harbor patrol response. Timing couldn't be better. Yesterday, I watched one run aground, okay? Had a race going on. To my eye, I haven't talked to Skipper yet, but it looked like he couldn't get the spinnaker down, okay? And at one point, it looked like it was gonna hit the rocks. He managed to miss the rocks, goes all the way into the beach, finally gets the spinnaker down, and about the time the spinnaker goes down, the boat stops. He hit the dirt, okay? The moment I saw this going downhill time, I just happened to be up there to watch it all happen in real time. So as soon as I realized he was in distress, I grabbed my cell phone, called Harbor Patrol. Don't know where they were, but we didn't get any Harbor Patrol. We got Baywatch. Yeah, and so thank goodness for Baywatch. Now, actually, the guy managed to get his auxiliary power started and backed off of the dirt by himself, so he didn't get towed. But yeah, I hear these stories about people going looking for Harbor Patrol and can't find them because they're someplace inland. So got great timing for that example. Anyway, final and last thing I want to touch on for the budget is boat parade and seafair. Quick history on that. For quite some years in a row, the city staff would notice different things that they could charge to the boat parade and seafair. And there's this permit and that permit and harbor patrol. And the cost went from $300 to $600 to eventually about $1,800, $1,900. And every year I would come to the budget process and say, okay, let's not insult hardworking volunteers for charging them to do this for us. And the city council would agree, waive all the fees. And then finally, Joe Hofkin, after about third, fourth year of this, he got a hold of me and says, let's not go through all that again. He said he would just make a recommendation for a blank $2,000 waiver, which would cover everything for boat parade and another $2,000 for seafair. And so we set that up as an ongoing expenditure. And so we were done. I didn't have to do this every year. But then COVID hit. Of course, all the waivers went away. Last year, Niels Narenheim and Todd Lowenstein put together a big summary recommendation, which reinstated both of those. So now, Greg, you might be able to just help us take care of this again. But what I don't know for sure at the moment is the way it was worded last year, did they word it as an ongoing or not? I just haven't had a moment to check.
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head.
Right.
But if it was a one-time event, we can make the recommendation, or maybe that's included in your letter, that we not only fund it for this year again, but make it ongoing.
Yeah.
Something to consider.
That'd be wonderful. So that'd be my one action item to request if you guys maybe do.
I mean, it's
Not doing seafair now, would you?
Oh, yeah. So here's the story on seafair. Julie Call, was the spark plug, and I would often serve as like her second or third in charge. But as you all know, she's now doing a wonderful job on this waterfront education program. So I don't see her recreating a seafair type thing, but a lot of us have had a discussion maybe about a harbor open house, And this doesn't have to be a huge undertaking like Seafair was. I mean, she worked her tail. We had 60 exhibitors on the yacht club property. Then we expanded for the whole King Harbor Marina. Then we set up stuff down at Basin 3 in the Redondo Beach Marina, and we were ready to go global. Like the next year, we were thinking about a taste of the harbor where we involved all of the restaurants. So there's an awful lot of cool stuff left that we could do. But my thought was to start really easy on this. We pick a day, we just start with the yacht club. The yacht club says, yeah, we're going to have an open house on this day. And then I pick up the phone and the email and I go to everybody else in the harbor and go, hey, we're going to have an open house this day. You want to do it at the same time? And anybody wants to do it, we put them on a flyer and we say, we're all having an open house on this day. Really low effort to kick this thing off, and hopefully get something good going. So for that reason, I would leave the Seafair on there with a little $2,000 waiver. We might use that name again or just call it an open house. But yeah, so I would recommend keeping that on there. Yes. All right.
Just to answer the question, there is a budget response report that speaks to special events. The council last year approved subsidies for a variety of events. The couple that Mark mentioned were covered. They were one-time in nature. So if the commission would like to recommend that the council continue or reconsider subsidies for those events, they should. But what I will say is for waterfront generated events, the department has the capacity in some instances to provide resources to conduct fun things like open houses and the like. Where sometimes it gets a little more difficult is if the event grows into something that requires other departments' participation, right? Fire, police, public works, et cetera. Then it's a broader event that we would look for some level of stated subsidy as part of the budget motion, or the applicant then is asked to pay the fees, which is what occurs for 5Ks and other things in the city these days. So if the commission wants to subsidize events, it is something that you may want to suggest to the council as part of your letter or motion that you draft.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I hadn't had a chance to look it up yet. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Are there any comments or?
There are no e-comments or Zoom comments.
Okay.
So Mike, just while you were out, I did look up the Channel Islands Harbor, which is up in Oxnard, falls under the county.
Okay.
Ventura County. The budget is under the Board of Supervisors. They have a harbor manager, and he advocates for the harbor patrol for budget and everything else.
Okay.
And they're considered public safety, and they do limited fire response
Interesting.
and limited
Okay.
Yeah. enforcement, but limited, not.
Yeah, Channel's a great example. I think as we had thought about kind of the different harbors to look at, we were, Channel Islands, I guess is that separate from Oxnard's? Is that Port Hueneme separate from that?
Yeah, that's a different.
Separate, right? So I think we were looking at Ventura then, and I think there are a lot of good examples. Avalon, obviously.
Yeah, they call theirs a harbor manager, and he advocates for the harbor patrol as part of that.
Okay.
As well as the economic side and the land side, so.
Okay, that's good.
And very
that's the
similar
kind of
because
analysis we want to do.
most of the land is leased out to different businesses, just
Right.
like our harbor, so.
Yeah, and that's precisely what I want to look at. I mean, that's what I'm looking for in the analysis is what are the functions, who supervises the functions, and then ultimately who supervises the people supervising the functions.
And then an MOA, I didn't find if it's current, but fire and police response, which is separate from harbor patrol, is funded by the city. The county funds
Right.
harbor
So they
patrol.
work in collaboration in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's precisely the kind of compare and contrast I'm looking for. And I think ideally we accomplish that in advance of our budget consideration, right? So we know exactly what we're seeking to achieve. Yeah.
One other quick comment, Elizabeth and Lori had done a market study back in 2019, and most of these other harbors directly manage their own slips. So their budgets are dramatically different than ours.
Right. Generating quite a bit of income for them, I imagine. Yes. We are dabbling in our 60 slips in Basin 3. We are slowly working through our own management pains. But yeah, the economics there are interesting. I mean, our master lease is the Port Royal in particular. We've got a very good, I would say, above market revenue share of the leases that are occurring there. I think we're at 27% of all gross, which that's a pretty good number. You'll see in some of these smaller harbors that that's the city, the municipality might share in 15, 17, 19% or 12 even, depending on the level of investment that's made. So it's sort of a cost benefit, but direct leasing has served us well in some instances, and others it's created headaches for us. So we got to figure out the balance.
Thanks.
Well, unless you have any other questions for me, I'll probably let you do your motioning without me unless you need something. But but I'm here, I'm in the back working if anything really comes up, just hammer me, okay? All right. Good to see all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks again.
On the parade and Seafair, or I guess separately, so we would be writing, if we choose to repeat what we usually do, for a waiver? Is that what the language?
I think you could just use the word subsidize and
Subsidize?
let
Okay.
council just, determine how they want to subsidize it.
Okay, and for open house, that would not have fees associated with it, right?
No, that just sounds like a coordinated approach.
Everything has fees associated with, what are you talking about?
We've had about 2,000 fees.
For the open house?
Sure.
Seeker, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any other discussions since the public comment?
I don't know what I would change
Yeah.
Yeah,
in what they got.
a couple years
There's money
ago,
there.
Stuff I wish that was added, at least from a note perspective, that, things are coming up and provide some commitment to it. But for what's in there, I'm okay with it. And some of it, like the strategic planning for commercial, it's not really a budget thing, that's a policy thing. So I'm not sure how I'd comment to it in here. They've got budget for a consultant. I think the thing that Mark brought up with the waiver or subsidization of the events is about the only thing I'd comment on.
And it's important to keep in mind, there is a mid-year budget review also that
Yes.
happens around November or so. Where
Correct.
they look at how revenues have come in compared to what the budget said and how expensive have gone out compared to budget, figure out how much extra money they have when usually they have extra money, where they then decide what capital projects they want to put it on. So we
Yeah, it's like a mid-year check-in on
Yeah.
revenues and expenses. And did we forecast correctly? Did we not? Do we need to adjust?
usually my experience is there's always money to be fought over with regards to capital projects. Because they don't reallocate, generally speaking, ongoing expenses at that point.
Right.
But they take projected surpluses, and then fight over what capital projects.
The
are
one-time
worthy.
capital,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So,
Thank you. That's absolutely correct.
The one thing from a format perspective would help me is the carryover in the CIP is like wasted to me, because there's no commitment to ever do anything with the money. It just, here's some money that just sits there forever. As a reader of the thing, I would like some assurance that there's actually a commitment to spend it rather than kick it down the road, where it's just the return on the money you're getting is less and less and less and less each year. What we're going to get out of 2.1 million for Mole B is much less than it would have been if we'd have done it a decade ago.
but that goes to the point that there are two things to move projects forward: funding and manpower.
Yep.
And you can have all the funding you want, but if you don't have the manpower to write the RFPs and scope out the project and move it
But I feel,
forward.
but I just feel like it's misleading. It's in carryover, and then you don't see it for.
Is that the
Right.
only example, though?
No, God, there's a.
No, there's a
no,
lot.
there's-
No, not for carryover, but where there's money that's been set aside. I mean, these are all money set aside carryovers?
Not every item on the CIP
topics.
has money allocated. A lot do. What I'll say is, I think we're at like 130 projects that are on that list, and routinely each year we get 30, 35 done. I mean, it takes a while to get through that list,
In fairness, half of them are in the middle of the project. So the
Right.
carryover is money that is actively being spent, and that project is actively moving forward. But yes, there are always those projects, like the transit center, that took 20 years to complete. And you allocate a capital budget for it, and then the money sits there and sits there and sits there. Technically, it has to be reapproved every year, but the fact that it's on the budget and then that budget gets voted on is how that money actually ends up getting reapproved every year. And yes, I've seen projects that nothing's gone on with the project and the money has rolled over every year for a decade. Well, and of course, Mulby is one of them, but it's not the only one. Not that that makes you feel any better, but
No, but as a member of the public, you read it in there and unless you follow it every year. And if you do follow it every year, well, this is kind of, waste of my time. I don't count on anything in the carry forward to ever be spent. And it's not always clear that this one's halfway through expended and the rest of it will be expended this year.
Right.
Right? It's on contract and it's obligated on a contract. That's the one piece of clarity I think would, beyond Harbor Commission, would add clarity for the public to understand what that thing really means.
Status updates within it, right? Where are we at? Are we designing it? Are we in permitting? Are we waiting for coastal commission? Where are we?
Do we have money for it and it's just sitting there doing nothing, or don't we even have money for it?
Right.
so I understand, got an email today, I believe it was an email, that the city just instituted some new capital project system where you can go online and see just that.
Yeah. I'm actually new to it too. I still need to kind of find my way around that, but that's how department heads and supervisors are updating the public works department, the city manager on just where we are in the status.
Did I describe it accurately as to what it is?
I think so. I still need to get in there and explore it a bit, to be honest with you. It's pretty brand new.
I thought we'd had that.
Well, the data I looked at wasn't much different than the CIP, and it's hard to correlate to the CIP.
I'm not sure what's, what my eyes can see from my login versus someone that's just, you know what I mean? Not sure. It's a new program, but.
Well, towards discussing sending something to council, I think we should send something. We always have. I like it as it is, so I would send something in support of this.
Yeah, I don't really have any.
In past years, we've actually asked for additional line items. I mean, not every line item I would wish for is in there, obviously not, but it's already more than we'll get done this year, and I understand the priorities. So, I would thank
I
them for
agree with the
attention to
exception,
Harbor.
maybe putting in the specific subsidization or waiver of fees for 2 events under 2K, for the boat parade and
Yeah.
something like Seafair / open house.
That's how I was going to summarize what I've been hearing so far, is that generally you're supportive of the budget with the addition of the subsidies, and that's how the letter could be drafted.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I don't necessarily think we have to opine on the format of the CIP, but it is frustrating to me.
Yeah. I can, talk to Public Works about some of the, stories you've heard and try to, it's not going to be a quick fix, but maybe we could implement something internally from a staff viewpoint on making it more readable.
Yeah, I know, when I was in a company and we were executing our strategic plan, which was similar to the CIP, we had to show progress against each one and if we spent money against it, where we're at, is there going to be money left over?
Yeah.
Is there some left to be spent? Are we going to need more?
Yeah, as a user, we meet monthly on the CIP and there are those details. It's just a matter of what's viewable and how we present it, right, to the public.
But I don't think we should necessarily opine on that.
Yeah.
So Greg, if we keep it that simple, can you just write it up versus us drafting something?
Absolutely. I think that would save time too.
So I make a motion that we ask, that we direct the harbor director to tell the council we're happy with the budget as is. The only request we have is the subsidization of the 2 events, the annual boat parade and the open house / Seafair for this year.
Do you want me to ask that be ongoing instead of one time as well?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yes.
Fair enough.
catch.
Yeah.
So is second, or
Second.
Any opposed?
okay.
Motion
right.
carried.
Passes 4-0.
I think it helps out the way Mike does it now, because we get that communication before it's final and
Good
then
process.
and
Yeah.
explains how he did it, or talks us out of doing anything.
And the longer meetings, for anybody still listening, the longer meetings the council has, planning this and building this are
They're-
pretty legible, accessible, helpful,
Yeah.
open, so.
Okay, we are on to item M, items from staff.
Yeah, I do have a director's report. I'll try to keep it brief for you guys. I got a few updates. A follow-up to Commissioner Kazan's request from the last meeting. You mentioned a green light, which is a navigational light being out down in the water. It's kind of the entrance. I looked into that. Our fire department is working with the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard actually maintains that light. So I don't have a timeline for you just yet, but conversations started as early as 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So once I find out more information, I'll include it in the director's report just in terms of fixing it. It might be a really, really simple fix, or it could be more elaborate. I'm not sure yet. As the city manager indicated, the sports fishing pier is completely demoed. That project's complete. The hand launch was reopened on May 26th, and that's going to be going for the entire summer season. The Harbor Patrol dock replacement project is underway. That's actually moving along at a pretty good clip. If you go out there, there's some actual new docks out there. You can see the concrete docks kind of taking shape, if you will. That's scheduled to be done in late July. The dredging project we talked about extensively. I don't know if I need to update you anymore on that, but the timing is coinciding, and we got the specs approved last meeting at City Council, and it included all of your recommendations. So we've got that going on. The International Boardwalk outdoor dining season is kicked off. We have a few, I know for sure we have Najas, El Baja Chef, Quality Seafood. They all have these outdoor dining decks available right now, and there might be more on the way. And then some subcommittee updates. The Seaside Lagoon Subcommittee met with the stakeholders, as well as our Nuvis group, our consultant, on May 16th. As Commissioner Light alluded, it was very pie in the sky. It was very first step, if you will. And like Mike alluded to, almost all of our projects start off that way, and we kind of pare them down before they get in front of you. And this is just another example of that. But we are
Just glad we didn't go to the public with it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Now we can blame Jim for this stuff, though. 'Cause it's-
We're meeting again tomorrow. So 3 of you are here. So I don't know why I'm telling you this. For Matt, we're meeting again tomorrow. And it'll,
About you the whole meeting.
yeah.
Brown act.
You know, I think I think we'll hopefully see, a more substantial jump forward in terms of our feedback. They took what they heard at that last meeting to heart. Several of you created comments. A couple of our department heads had a list of comments. They went out and toured the site on a weekend, talked to operational staff. So I think we'll see some movement there. What else do we have going on? Oh, the dry boat storage. We had some homework that we were going to do, and Roger was kind enough to get that done. We are going to meet again on June 19th. We just set that up.
Leslie had good input today.
Leslie had great input today, yeah. So we will meet again to go over the findings, go over some of the input that Leslie had, talk about where we want to go next and what our next steps are. And then Mike, city manager, actually alluded to this as well. The other subcommittee is the Waterfront Education Subcommittee. We haven't needed to meet just yet, but on a related note, the Gensler architect group that was really looking at the site itself and what's actually buildable out there in terms of development standards and Measure C and all that, they have come up with some design concepts, and they'll be presenting that to City Council on July 18th. And that concludes my director's report. I can actually field any questions you may have on anything I just said, or maybe something I didn't mention.
So I got some comments on, I guess, I didn't get to make the meeting, but I guess the council went for our comments on the bike path through the parking structure.
Correct.
I don't know, did they go for the timed lighting?
No, they went to a full-time prohibition in that plaza area, and they lifted the prohibition altogether, pretty much anything north of the restrooms there.
People are already ignoring that part, so. But I did get some complaints from the public that the chicanes they did put in are too tight even for,
Okay.
for bikes going two different ways at the
Right.
same time on the weekends. They were,
Yeah, a part of our recommendation, well, the way we presented it to council was, we do want, and you guys agreed, we do want the prohibition to be in that plaza area, and that we wanted time to kind of work out how best to put permanent barriers in there. And they agreed, and they gave us direction to kind of do that research. But at the very end, there was an amendment to the recommendation or for their approval, that that wanted temporary ones done just before Memorial Day weekend. So I think Public Works kind of reacted to that. Maybe wasn't the best design, but it was something that they just did for Memorial Day weekend. We can certainly make adjustments. We're not married to that at all.
Yeah, I had one where it was a parent with a kid in the seat and
Yeah.
say almost dumped the kid because he's trying to negotiate the chicane and a guy walking his bike the other way at the same time.
Yeah, and I had sent you a picture. I just see bikes on the sidewalk now. Bikes are ungovernable. So, they're going to be upstairs at Old Tony's.
Yep.
I think that's where enforcement should be focused, where they're not supposed to ride at all.
Right. I think it's going to be, once we implement the permanent chicanes, improve the signage, improve the painting, all that stuff, it's going to be a little bit like the skate park where we kind of learn as we go where enforcement should be placed and how staffing levels should be. And, it's going to be a little work in progress where we dial this in.
And I still think the 24/7 is the staff report back in whatever it was, 2019 said it's just going to be ignored because
Right.
it doesn't make sense at 5 a.m. when nobody's down there.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, item N, commission items and referrals to staff.
Public.
I think we may have a comment.
Apologies. Public.
Yeah, just one comment on the director's report, and Greg, this might be easier for me just to ask you maybe to tell me about, tomorrow night, the fireworks is going to be discussed by the city council, and I just heard an hour discussion about it at Mules and Ehrenheim's community meeting, but rather than me do it second or third hand, let me just hand it off to Greg.
Yeah, thank you. It's a hot topic right now. So essentially, there's been some new regulations that were adopted, essentially requiring cities and other jurisdictions to apply for a permit before you do any kind of fireworks show. And that's the kind of, it's environmental concerns about doing fireworks near the water and all that. What it effectively has done, it has, for lack of a better term, scared off these contractors. They don't view it so much as a permit that they have to get, but they view it as a bunch of conditions that need to be met, or there will be consequences. And because this law is so new, nobody knows what the consequences are. Is it a lawsuit? Is it fines? So until this has been sorted out and kind of ironed out, what we're finding are these companies that have contracts with various jurisdictions to perform the fireworks show are simply pulling out. And they're saying, we're just going to focus on the areas that are inland that don't have this additional responsibilities. So a lot of the coastal communities are left kind of grasping at air a month before the big 4th of July celebration. And as we all know, it takes a long time to prepare for these things. So there's an item tomorrow night to kind of talk about what has happened at the state level, what the ramifications are, and ultimately City Council, after receiving that information, may opine on alternative locations where we can have this that our existing vendor might be okay with. It was a curveball. Most of the time when you see a law change like this, so close to what they're targeting, they say, okay, this is the rule, but it's not effective until, in this case, January 1st. That way you can all do the last show, the last show. And as a group, all the coastal communities can get together and sort these regulations out. We don't know why they didn't take that approach. It's effective now, and it's causing problems. Thank you, Mark.
Any other public comments?
No other public comments.
Thank you. Okay, Roger.
Yeah, a couple things. Any update on the skate park? So far, so good?
So far, so good. Obviously there were growing pains. It's still popular, but we've improved the signage out there. We've got security guards that are out there at night to kind of help offset PD's response times. They don't want to go out there for every little call. They kind of want to just be pulled in when they're needed to. That's been helping. The police chief has indicated that compliance has improved. We have a hotline that Dave set up for complaints so that we can kind of track the type of complaint. If we need to go back to city council to amend the rules and regs, we've at least got some kind of, criteria that we're basing it on. One of the strategic plan items that council set up was exploring ways to improve safety, to improve compliance out there. I think we're already seeing that, and that's by way of the police chief, myself, and the Public Works Department meeting every once in a while, about once a month, to talk about how things are going out there, to kind of pivot and adjust where needed. So it's going well. It's going real well.
Great, yeah. I've checked it out a number of times, and it's one of the few things I've seen that's getting people down there, on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon in the middle of the week. And honestly, older people than I thought. So, hopefully that brings more traffic down to the pier and more
and-
business and
And it's a
stuff.
spectator sport too.
It is. That's what I'm doing. Believe me,
Yeah. And I'm,
going
and I'm seeing, young kids out there with instructors. And I mean, it's really cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple other items. One, for anybody that might have missed it, there's a great article on Danny Ching of Lanakila in the Easy Reader. He just won a solo race from Molokai to Oahu. He's the president of Lanakila and also the head coach. So, that club is not just there for show. We have world-class people in that club. So he just won that race at
Wow.
age 40 and has won it in the past. It's a very long article. It's a great article. So really good read. The last thing I mentioned this in an amenities meeting, I think. We got feedback in various amenities meetings that people would really like to see a swimming pool somewhere in the city. And if we could put a swimming pool in at Seaside Lagoon as part of all this. And one thing I had said in one of those meetings is, well, there's a lagoon there now that you can swim in. And so it doesn't necessarily take a high maintenance, 25-yard pool with lanes and all that stuff and a second water feature that we got to run the filters on. So I went down and tried it. I actually went down to Seaside Lagoon and I paid my $8 and I went in today and went
Nice.
lap swimming. It was great. As Seaside Lagoon is meant to be, it's a nice bridge for little kids to go from, the kiddie pool to something that's more like the ocean to open ocean. Well, I do open ocean swimming. It's tough to do that every day. It's a little spooky doing that solo. This was a really nice bridge toward open ocean swimming. You've got no walls. You've got like a 50-yard run. You got no lanes. You got to kind of, look and practice. It's a lot more fun than just a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And so to turn it into a lap pool, all you really have to do is throw 2 or 3 buoys into it for people to swim around, and they could be permanent and be in there all the time.
Yeah.
So, my actual referral to staff would be consider that, consider some kind of lap swimming program. People like to do it early in the morning. People like to do it at lunch. But, if there was a ticket book you could sell and some way to encourage lap swimmers to take advantage of it, especially in the mornings when it's not being used and crowded. I was like the only one in the water today. On the downside, I paid $8 to get in and I paid $2 to park. So it was,
Yeah.
$10 for 45 minutes. We'd have to figure out some kind of, lower cost way or a coupon book or, get out of the water by noon or something.
That's actually related
I
to
don't know.
another movement that Jim Light has actually brought up a few times, and we're going to pair that with the project that city manager mentioned. We're transitioning the Redondo Beach surface parking lot that serves Ruby's on the Rocks, all that,
yeah.
to electronic pay stations. With that project, we're going to be adjusting the master fee schedule to reflect, proper pay rates and to go into compliance with Measure C, which actually requires a reduced rate for recreational users. For sure, anybody using
Frequent.
yeah. So it's on the books for this year. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So, if anybody's still listening and wants to go lap swimming,
Yeah.
First of all, get a life. Don't listen to 2 hours of Harbor Commission meetings. And second, give it a try.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Thanks. Jim, you have something?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, when you brought up the subject of fireworks, it triggered some memory. I remember that issue coming up a year ago
Yeah.
with the city of San Diego. LA Times article, February of this year, talks about it. And the court case was a federal lawsuit filed in November of 2021 arguing that fireworks shows by bodies of water violate the Clean Water Act. Now, they were saying in this article, it's saying that they expect a judgment within a week or two, and this was back in February.
Right.
So I imagine there's been some judgment now that is pushing this thing, but it doesn't seem like it's a new regulation from the state of California. Just from this article, it seems like it's the implementation or the whatever of the Clean Water Act.
So it is a new regulation. They adopted it like May 16th or something like that. So there are new rules on the books that everyone's reacting
In addition
to.
to this.
In addition to that, what previously, before this all kind of went down, what we were seeing as a community was there was private litigation happening where someone was just targeting, at that point, just the larger cities that had these fireworks shows and claiming that there was environmental impacts and settling, essentially, kind of winning money that way. We knew likely we were going to be subject to something like that unless we went to a drone show, at least a claim that there was going to be some kind of litigation. Luckily for us, that never really transpired. We never had to face that. But, you know, I think the state maybe felt the pressure and reacted.
Yeah.
I think that's why we're at where we're at.
Another aside with regards to swimming pools, when they tore down Aviation High School decades ago, there was a promise at the time to build a swimming pool there just north of Aviation Gym. There, that big chunk of dirt there was supposed to be a swimming pool. It's just never happened.
Yeah, I've heard that too, yeah.
Thanks.
I don't have anything else.
I
Thank
don't
you.
have anything else either.
I do have one if I could go back.
Sure, go.
I don't know if I want to hear back officially, but Greg, I think it's important that we drive forward on two items. One is, you know, how do we engage the Harbor Commission to be involved in lease stuff that's going on without burdening the process or going to closed session?
Yeah.
And that ties directly with this strategic
Absolutely.
commercial thing, and rather than kick the can down the road every month.
No, yeah, I've actually already been talking to my staff about that. You know, I think Commissioner Callahan last meeting kind of approached the subject unrelated to that, but related to leasing, just some kind of a leasing update that shows how much vacancy rate is there, what's the breakdown of the existing uses. And so I think what we're planning on doing is kind of every once in a while grouping that report together with a discussion about your guys' vision of what kind of tenancy we should be seeking. And together having that discussion so that staff and our leasing agent can move forward for the next 3 to 4 months and report back again of what kind of progress we made, what kind of hits we're receiving with the uses that you guys were showing as a priority. So I think.
But then the strategic, you know, what do we do long-term with commercial?
So that, I want to make sure that we're very clear about what the strategy implementation thing is. This is really, it's twofold. One, it's, yeah, we want to see what kind of uses we can get, but two, it's how do we redevelop Pier Plaza, right? And what's the ramifications of that? And the leasing strategy is you can't, everything's public in a public setting. You can't make a decision to go out for an RFP to redevelop Pier Plaza without having a plan of action regarding, you know, okay, from this point onward, we're only doing 3-year leases. Now we're only doing 2-year leases. Now we're only doing 1-year leases. And having a time frame to do that, because once the news is out that we're, you know, under contract with a developer, you know, those businesses are going to seek shelter elsewhere, and we might have a very high vacancy rate while we work through the 2 to 3 year process it takes to get entitlements and to go through Coastal Commission before you start construction. And you want, in my opinion, to have as much reduced vacancy as possible throughout that whole process, so you wane off, and when it's time to demo, that's when people are moving out. It's tackling those issues as well, right? Also with the Fun Factory space, do we go to a master leaseholder there? Do we do the improvements ourselves? What's our strategy? Who can we attract? I think the team that puts together this leasing strategy is going to be a leasing agent, a broker, and some kind of financial consultant. And that's the team that kind of creates this thing that we can kind of use, much like the amenities plan, but from a leasing standpoint and say, okay, when this project gets kicked out underway, these are our steps, right? That make sense?
Yeah, with some guidance on, we don't want it to be all bars and it's
Absolutely.
got to be a mix of uses. And
Absolutely.
You know, like
Yeah.
Muscle Beach.
I want to become Pier Plaza.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor, aye. All right,
that.
good night.
Before 9 o'clock.
It's not bad, guys.